I would like to take you back to when um, my NDE or my death experience happened. Um, this was many years ago in the 90s in Amsterdam, in Holland. I was an art student and an art college, and it happened in the month of April. So I was on a Friday morning, a very beautiful spring morning, on my bicycle on my way to school. And I was very elated. It was because of the weather, because of my mood, everything was going really well. I was very happy in my art college. I had a wonderful boyfriend, and it was also 3 days before the national holiday in Holland that was called Queen's Day, because that was the national holiday in celebration of the Queen's birthday. Now, of course, nowadays there is a king, King Willem Alexander, but in the 90s it was his mother, so it was Queen's Day. And that is the biggest festivity in Holland. And it's like a sort of 24-hour bonanza of live music and lots of drinking and dancing and joy and open air markets. And so there was this sort of happy anticipation for this big day that was coming. So I'm on my bicycle in the morning, cycling to school, and I entered a very big crossing in the center of town, and the stoplight was red. So I stopped in front of the light, and I noticed that a very big vehicle had pulled up on my left side. I did not pay so much attention to it. I was very much in my own thoughts. Then as the light went green, this vehicle, this truck, started to steer very quickly to the right side. And so it started to push me into the curb. And I found that a little scary. And I remember as it sort of passed me, or started to pass me and steering at a speed to the right direction, that I remembered as it passed me that I sort of looked up, trying to see if I could get a glimpse of the driver, something like, hey, watch out. And then the last thing I remember was that something hit me from behind and everything went black. It was like a sort of a thud that came from behind, and everything goes blank, basically. Then the next thing I remember is I spiraled out of my body. And at some point, I sort of hovered over the scene. And the very first thing I noticed was that I had 360-degree peripheral vision. And so that was very awe-inspiring. So I was really in awe, admiring that experience, that my awareness, my consciousness had somehow expanded into, into that very sort of meta experience. So I remember looking out over the roofs, seeing, parts of Amsterdam, looking into the sky, and it was really very overwhelmingly beautiful. And as I lingered for a moment in sort of processing that experience, I started to realize that I was out of my body. So then my gaze was pulled down below, and I started to notice that it was like everything had come to a still stand. It was like I was somehow out of time, and like everything was in a freeze frame. And I started to look below me, and I started to understand more or less what had happened. I saw a black and white zebra path, like a pedestrian crossing. I saw my body sort of next to it. I saw my legs cradling the bicycle in a very strange way. I started to notice that there was blood trickling between my legs. And in that moment, from that awareness, I felt no pain. I felt very calm and distant in a way. I felt actually no emotions. It was like a very calm, neutral observation of what had taken place, trying to make sense of these different components, being out of the body, seeing my body down below. And as my awareness sort of consolidated in a way, I started to realize something very serious had happened. And then, like, everything started to move in slow motion, and I started seeing people running towards me from two sides. I noticed the canal, I noticed the little bridge, and so people were moving towards me. And I remember thinking, oh, why don't these people just all leave me alone? Leave me here to die. And in that moment, something in my wider consciousness really, it sort of clicked that I was dead, that my body down below had no life. And that made me a bit sad, that sort of conclusion. And then my gaze, my awareness was pulled towards a man or someone, and I think I knew it was a man, and this man sort of ran towards me. And he started to keep people at a distance, and he squatted next to my body on the street. And I noticed that with one of his hands, he took my hand, and then he pulled something white out of his pocket that I later learned was a handkerchief. And this man basically saved my life. So he made sure that they didn't move me. He sort of handled, everything around me and sat with me. And this all went very fast, obviously. And then as I started to get the full scope of what had happened to me, it was like everything started to move again, and even faster than normal speed. And at that moment, I remember looking down and being very calm and very decisive. And I thought, okay, I have to let go. I'm going to let go. And it was like an invisible thread had still connected me, very thin thread, like I'd been this sort of kite on a string, still connected to my body. And in that moment, I decided that I was going to let go. And then everything moved very fast. And I remembered that it was like I pulled away from Earth, pulled away from the scene, from the accident. Of course, I forgot to mention that actually, so the truck actually drove over the middle part of my body with its double wheels. And the impact of this truck that weighed in on 13 tons, it was a stone truck that had come from a construction site in the center of Amsterdam. And it was empty. So it had just brought his load and was on the way back. And so what I had felt coming from the back was the back wheels of this truck, and the impact of the truck driving over my body had caused my soul, my consciousness, to leave my body. It was like, shoo. And in that moment, when I realized that I was dead, I shot away from Earth. It was like I went at great speed through the sky, through the clouds, through the atmosphere, and then everything went black. The next thing I recall, the next moment I re-awoke in consciousness. I was floating in space. And this was a very comfortable, a very nice experience, actually. And funny enough, I seem to remember that the first thing that emerged in my consciousness was, oh, I remember this. I've done this before. And in my perspective, in my experience, space is not black. Space is not even really dark. It was a sort of really beautiful, a sort of dark blue. And there's lights. So you see sort of distant lights, at least that's what I remember. And it was an overwhelming sense of freedom, liberation. And I realized that I had no body, that I was no longer physical, that I had also no longer had any limitations. I felt very, very free, very limitless. I realized that I had no identity, no gender, that I was nobody. And quite the contrary to what many people think, I found that an overwhelmingly pleasant experience. And so that lasted for a while. And as I'm floating in space and sort of taking that in and being very comfortable and balanced in that experience, I remember that I was observing certain scenes from the life I had just departed. No, sorry. I think the first thing I saw was that I was pulled towards the golden infinity sign. So my consciousness is pulled towards a very large golden infinity sign. I saw it. It was a sort of portal, you could say. And the sort of golden flow of the sign, it was alive. So it was very bright, sparkly light, and it really felt electrifying, and I was sort of pulled towards it. So I moved towards this golden infinity sign, and it was like I was suspended above it. And then what I remember is seeing certain scenes from the life I had just departed. And what I saw, or maybe a better way to say it, is the way that it was shown to me. Because it was like certain scenes in my childhood were being replayed within my consciousness for me to see, to observe. And what I saw was I was having an argument with my mom, but I wasn't observing the scene through my own perspective. It was like I was reliving the scene through the perspective of my mother. And my mother was very hurt and she was very upset. And it was very profound to experience the impact of my actions. So we're having this very heated argument, and I was made to feel the impact of me screaming at my mom, the sort of aggression that was projected towards her. And I was really taken aback, like, wow, I had never realized that. That is really quite something. And so a few other scenes also sort of replayed themselves. And I was very much reflecting on that. But also that I was still quite young. I was still only 28 when that happened, and that I thought, wow, I'm still so young. In a way, I was sad that I had left that life, but I also felt a sense of that I had had actually a really great life. Because I had traveled, I was doing the things that I loved, I had a wonderful partner, I had wonderful parents. So there was also a sense of this deep gratitude all at once. So it was also very interesting to see that one can hold these seemingly opposing emotions and observations, but I really did. And so when that finished, everything went back to black. And then I reawoke in what I would call the blue zone. And this was a very mystical, is probably the best word, sort of dimension. And it was like I re-emerged into a sphere, a dimension where everything was blue. And it was an electric blue. And it was like an infinite blue. It was like I was in this infinite sea of electric blue light. And not only was it so profoundly blue, but it had a sort of sound to it. It had a sonic boom. And it was like I was breathing, I was alive with this blue and with this sort of sonic cosmic boom. Yeah, it had a rhythm, a heartbeat, you could say, almost like a cosmic heartbeat. And it felt very peaceful. I felt really, I felt my own infinity, and just being in awe of this, of that experience, that, you know, this space, that dimension that I had never been to before, that I had, you know, no idea that that existed. And I would later learn what that space actually meant for me. So as I left this blue, this indigo blue zone, again, everything went to black. And then the last place and the last dimension, you could say, that my consciousness went to was what I would now call source energy. The source, you know, of all creation, the divine, the infinite creator or creatrix. And that was the most overwhelmingly beautiful experience one can have. Certainly the one that I had. It was really like, if you want to use the word God, because for many people that would mean God, it was really like being cradled in the arms of God. And your realization is that, so I experienced it like white golden light. I was a part of white golden light. It felt like home. And for a young woman that had always, and especially as a child, struggled to belong, that in and of itself was an overbearingly deep sensation, to finally be home, to know that I belonged, that was where I had always belonged. It was also an overwhelming sense of love, of being loved, but also of being love. So both of them. And not really the kind of love, the romantic love that we have on earth as a human, the sort of the attachment love, the personified, the personalized love, but this universal cosmic love, the love of all things. And that also is it. those experiences, they're too big, they're too deep to be caught in words. So I have often said that what I experienced there, especially in this in source energy, cannot be put in words. I feel that words are merely describing, the sort of the fringes of it, the contour. That's how truly also quantum, how multidimensional that is, because it's really touching on the sort of universal essence of who we are. And it was an overwhelming sense of ecstasy and joy and timelessness and just being whole, being home, being whole. All of that is what I can give it in vocabulary. And as I'm being extremely happy and just being in this beautiful source energy, all of a sudden I hear a voice, and that voice said, "You can't stay. You have to go back." And I remember that I felt a panic, and that I started to have this bargaining with God, as I call that. And of course, all of this is done without a sound. This is all done telepathically, because that's all done on an energetic level. And so my soul, my essence pleaded for my life. I pleaded to stay. And I said, "Oh, please, don't let me go back. I am perfectly happy. I have always wanted to be here. Let me stay. I'll do anything." And this went on for a while, me pleading, bargaining. And clearly that voice, that consciousness, it didn't really engage in any dialogue. It was more just my soul, trying to find a way to stay. And then it just repeated what it had said before. It said, "No, you can't stay. You have to go back." And then the next thing I remember is waking up in an intensive care unit on a respirator machine with, tied up to many machines and tubes coming out of my body, and that I was alone in a little clinical room in a hospital somewhere. Yes. The moment that I had that sensation in space, that was really the moment that I realized that I was having an extraordinary experience. And also all these realizations, this knowing that you are not your body, that you are something much, much bigger than your body, that you are not your name, your identity, or, your accumulated memories, but that you are really this beautiful divine spark, this divine soul that is just having a temporary human experience. And once we leave the limitations, the confines of that physicality, of that physical body, and we re-emerge into what we could call, the universal field of consciousness, or the field of infinite potential, that you're having a very extraordinary experience. Yes. I only started to have recall and recollections sort of in flashes. I actually, when I was in intensive care, the first few days, the first week, I don't think I fully realized, first of all, what had happened to me. You're very drugged. They kept me, I was in a coma for 3 days, and then they keep you in sort of, in a degree, how I say, of you, they pump you full of morphine. So your consciousness is not clear. So you have no capacity to really fully understand, to make sense of all that has happened to you. And because I had so much internal damage and broke every bone in my body, your physical body and the little bit of your brain that is actually functioning, and it's very tiny, they are in survival mode. So you're not really, you don't really have the bandwidth, that's probably a better word, to fully cognize, the immensity of what has happened to you. On one hand, the accident that had taken place, in our reality, and then all of these incredible, metaphysical things that had happened to me once I was out of my body. So the recollection of my NDE, of my, what I call my death experience, it came in flashes, and it started coming in the weeks when I started to recover after my second really large reconstructive surgery. So that all of that happened over a much longer period of time. But I was aware that I had died. I remember the moment that I was off the respirator machine, when I could speak again, I remember saying that, like, but I died. So it was also very strange for me, and I know that this is something for the thousands of people, other people that have had similar NDEs, that it takes a while. It takes quite a lot for the mind to sort of process that, because what is that even, So you died, but then you're not dead. So then you're back. And so, what was all of that? And how do I actually process that? How do I relate to that? What did it mean? Where did I go? I had no answers. And so these things actually sort of unfolded over time. Yeah. Not all at once. I did not know the abbreviation, the near-death experience. Of course, I had heard of people that had out-of-body experiences. That is not exactly the same as an NDE. So you can have an out-of-body experience where your consciousness still stays very close to the body, like what happened in my case when the impact of the truck caused my consciousness to sort of leave, to shoot out of the body, and I was still somewhat connected. So a part of my awareness and my consciousness was still interacting. Yeah, they were still entangled with each other. And there was a sort of an awareness of the body. That's an OBE. Yeah, so there's many people that have an experience where they are sort of floating on top of their body. They're still very close. Yeah, but an NDE is really when you have a death experience. It's when you really go through the veil. You really pass through that threshold of 4D, because basically you go into the astral, because you go into the fourth dimension, which is where the astral realm is held. And that is not the same as an OBE. So there's a slight difference. So I was aware of that as concepts of out of body, but I had never obviously experienced anything like that myself. And so in all the months and years after what happened to me, I started to order many books about these particular phenomena. So I started reading books on Buddhism and metaphysics, and an American writer called Raymond Moody, who was very well known because he had written many books in the 80s and the 90s about people in hospitals who have life-saving surgery or who had heart attacks and then sort of had those temporarily out-of-body experiences or going through some kind of death experience. I have to mention here that, of course, in the early 90s, there was no such thing as the internet. We didn't even have proper computers, laptops like we have now. So in my quest to understand what had happened to me and to sort of find, some kind of perspective, read a lot of books, and most of those books came from America. And I also started to notice, and this is actually a very important point, that very quickly I noticed that my NDE was quite different than the ones that were described in most of the books. So Raymond Moody really described a sort of a similar pattern, that thousands of patients or people that had those experiences all had the same experience. And that was that they leave their body, they either go through a tunnel of light or they go towards a light. This did not happen to me. I do not recall any light. I also don't recall going through a tunnel. As I explain always when I describe my personal experience, is it went black. It's like my consciousness sort of logged off, like, and then sort of came back online in a different dimension, in a different frequency, really. So I did not see a light and I did not go through a tunnel. So I started to realize that there were different kinds of NDEs. And of course, nowadays this is much easier because you can, you can go online and within 3 seconds, you can have thousands or millions of hits on NDE, OBE, all of those things. But that was quite different, 30 years ago. The first person or the first people I spoke to obviously were my then boyfriend, my partner, and my parents. And then when I started to recover and in the month that I was in hospital, all the friends that visited me, we sort of talked about it. But the thing is that it wasn't really a two-way conversation. It was more me having this need to express what had happened to me and them listening, because of course none of them had any real perspective on this, because nobody in my social circles or in my family had a similar experience. So it was very singular, and it also makes you feel a little bit alone. And what they also provide you with in hospital is every patient that goes through a death experience, at least in Holland, they are provided with a psychiatrist. So in the weeks that followed, during the early start of my recovery, a man came, a psychiatrist, and sat by my bed twice a week to speak to me, because obviously, the medical establishment in Holland, they understood that people who have had those very life-changing experiences, they can be a little bit shaken up. So there was some kind of psychological support. But again, that didn't really sort of supply me with any of the answers that I was seeking. It provides you, a sort of a baseline of psychological support, and that you are not crazy. I didn't make it up, and I was very lucky that no one in my immediate surroundings, nobody thought I was crazy, but there was no feedback. So I really had to set out on my own sort of quest to find answers. Not in a sense, some things changed, but I would say at a fundamental level, I still valued life like I had done before. As an artist, you already have a very special relationship with life. Artists relate in a unique way to life. So in that sense, I found life very special, very valuable, very fragile. And of course, that fragility gets highlighted because you realize that, I was just a small girl on a bicycle and accidents happen, they come out of nowhere, and they could have totally, changed the course of my life, as in I could have also been dead and not have come back to my body. What I also would like to add to that, by the way, is that 3 days after the actual accident, while I was in intensive care, I died again. Because what happens is that the body goes into a shock trauma, because I had such extensive damage from the impact of that big vehicle on my body. What happens is that either the patient dies within the first 24 hours, or when they make it through, the sort of cutoff line is 3 days. And by the third day, on the Sunday night, my heart stopped. And so I died again. And so I was resuscitated or brought back. And I have learned many years later, as mostly through my spiritual experiences, my mystical experiences, that blue zone where I went to, that blue dimension, that was the dimension where another part of my soul walked back into my body. So my entire old soul was taken out of my body, taken back to source, and then a higher vibrational part, a part that was higher than 5D, came back and went into my body, animated my body. And that also came with a message, with a purpose, and that was that I was going to share about my death experience, that death is not real, of course, that we, exist beyond the body, and that we are truly immortal beings, that we are a divine spark, and also that I was going to play a role in the awakening process on Earth. And so that new part, which we call a walk-in spiritual mystical terms, that was fully equipped, or much better equipped, to accept that new purpose, to be of service to a planet and to humanity, to be this ascension guide, to guide people through this incredible shifting consciousness that you and me and everybody that is incarnated at the moment on our planet is navigating through. And that is a very beautiful mission that made my purpose very clear. So that sharing that and knowing that, of course, makes my whole NDE experience sort of even more profound, and it made more sense. So I also want to say that because I clinically died twice, I don't really know exactly which memory belongs to which day. So that is true. But on the whole, I don't think that makes any difference, because it's not about the chronology of things. It's also almost impossible to say how things unfold once you're outside the time-space conundrum that we are in 3D. Because once you leave the body, once you enter into 4D, into the astral, there is no time. You see, so it's already very hard to say how long things last. Yeah, because, and as I've noticed with people with similar experiences, they feel much longer than they were back in the physical, because it felt like I was in those different dimensions for eons, for lifetimes. Yeah, but of course, when we relate that to a physical existence that is time-based, yeah, locked in time and space, of course, that is a physical impossibility, you see? So it's incompatible. So, but I just want to point that out. So I have this very profound recall of the different dimensions that my consciousness visited, where I was awake in consciousness. But I don't really know if I know a part of it happened while I was on the street, really directly, because I understood I had died. But clearly something else happened, during the second time where my body went into, where all my organs started to shut down, and eventually my heart stopped beating. So just as a sort of frame of reference.
Thank you for that. Did this change your relationship with your family and other people?
Yes. The whole experience, of course, it changes you profoundly on those levels. How I saw my parents, how I saw my friends, of course, they become very special, because in the first few months, maybe the first year after an event like that, it's like almost like you're really being reborn. And I definitely was, because I was this new soul in this broken body. And it was almost like I had another love affair with life. It was like I was in the honeymoon of life. I was so grateful. I felt grateful every day for all the goodness in my life, and that I had my life back, that I was recovering, that my body was healing. It was amazing. But of course, at least in my case, that does not sustain. At some point you also that honeymoon phase sort of phases out, and you do sort of come back, you sort of settle back into a sort of normality. But yes, the first year, or definitely the first few months, and I would definitely say a little longer than a year if I remember it well. Yes, you're in this sort of honeymoon, because you're so elated that that you're back alive, and that really certainly makes all of your relationships very special. So my whole NDE experience and everything that came with it, of course, has hugely shaped my life and where I am today. As I mentioned, I became aware during my whole, what I call my spiritual awakening, what the extent was of my purpose. And I was very encouraged. I felt very encouraged and inspired to really pursue that, to live my purpose. So my NDE and what happened, and my subsequent recovery, and what I took away from that, it has formed, informed and also shaped really who I am today. It couldn't be any other way, because you're really not the same person. So it really took me on that whole spiritual quest. I started to practice meditation and yoga. I read books on Buddhism, the Tibetan book on the death. I traveled to India many, many times. The way that I created my art changed because, of course, I also had a great need to express what had happened to me. So I started making works that reflected my experiences in these other dimensions. I started writing about it. And it's all of that has really led me to where I am today, which is, you know, being a guide, being a spiritual mentor to people who are very actively awakening and on the ascension journey, and who are awakening, to all of those things that I experienced in that one traumatic moment. And what is so beautiful is that once you surrender to your purpose, when you say, okay, I accept and I open myself to spirit, I surrender to spirit and, bring me the path, let me see the path, and I'll walk the path to the best of my abilities. Many synchronicities started to happen. And so in me accepting my purpose, I was led very synchronistically to a lady called Dolores Cannon, who is now very, very famous because she was a very renowned past life regressionist who who founded a technique, a modality where she could speak to people's higher selves, to speak to your soul self. And she also started to bring through her many sessions, wisdom and knowledge from other beings, from higher beings, from ET beings from other planets, other galaxies. And so this was a very beautiful unfolding of events. So I studied with her when she was in England. And then I started to become a QHHT facilitator, which formed a beautiful fusion with the path I was on, because now I could guide people using a particular kind of hypnosis, not only through past lives, but through these very serene death processes without having to suffer the trauma of an accident. So I went through death and had an experience of other lifetimes caused by a trauma, and that also caused trauma in my being, in my body. But with QHHT, or with a particular kind of past life regression, you can actually guide people through that in a very peaceful, in a very safe way. So it was really wonderful that now my service, being a mentor in that sense, sort of took on another dimension of guiding people through similar experiences that had so changed my life, but in this very peaceful, safe way. Everything that happened in my NDE has brought me to where I am today. Well, the same as I saw it right after the event, and that is that death is not real. Really, death does not exist. What we call death, what we refer to as death, as dying, is a transmutation of energy. So in essence, we are all energetic beings. We are a frequency. And in this death process, what happens is that your energy leaves this realm. It leaves the body. It gets separated from the body to re-emerge into this larger energy body, this incredible field of cosmic consciousness. So I see death as a most mystical portal, because birth and death in a way are very similar. The one is the reverse of the other. It's an inversion. So when a baby is born, the soul comes into the fetus in the mother's womb. Yeah. At some point in the development of the baby, not right away. So the soul literally comes into the body, into the baby. And at the moment of birth, your consciousness, your essence, your energy emerges into this 3D consciousness, into this limited realm of duality and polarity and separation. So this baby, you as a baby, you come from this consciousness of this source energy, of being one with everything, of being love, of, you know, the omniscient, omnipotent love energy. But the moment this baby is born, everything sort of limits, everything shrinks. So your consciousness then is being birthed into a much, you could say, a much smaller consciousness. And what we call death, in the death journey, the opposite happens. So the identity, the consciousness, the personality that thinks that this consciousness that it has, that it operates as in the physical reality, is all that it is. But the moment of dying is very serene. It's really very peaceful, as there is this just separating from the physicality. And physicality is very dense. Your body is very dense. And when you go through death, the first thing you notice is how light you are. You are light. You're literally light. Energy is light. Light is energy. So death is not real. And you are not your body. You are not limited. You are everything. I think the most important message is that humanity and our planet as a whole is in a very active process of awakening, of expanding, also realizing that actually we are not alone, you know, with everything that's playing out in the movie, as I call it, in the movie of the world, with everything that is happening on the stage of the world. Yeah, all the news and all the stuff that happens in the media. There is a greater awareness that is sort of blossoming, and that is that we are way more than our body, that we are not alone, that actually we are just a tiny planet. We are one aspect in a much larger community of other planets, of other galaxies, you know, and that we are also at the threshold of meeting in person, in the physical, with our star brothers and sisters. This is also going to happen because many of us have, they are called starseed. I'm a starseed. I did not come from Earth. My soul came from somewhere else. And there's thousands of us now. And so we are in this incredibly fertile, exciting, electric moment where Earth and all of its beings are about to take this next leap in consciousness. That we are all divine beings. We all carry that spark of the divine, always. And that we are more than our body. That also that we exist in many other forms and lifetimes and dimensions. And that we are about to meet with our space brothers and sisters. And that is a very, very beautiful thing, That is nothing to be afraid of. So I'm very much a big part of my message, and what I would like to leave your viewers also is to step out of fear. You are a being of love, and you are unlimited. You are light. You are divine. And if you understand your purpose, your life will unfold in the most miraculous, magnificent way. And also to understand that nobody is truly alone. We are intrinsically connected to everyone and everything else. We are not just this little singular being that's cut off from everything. We are incredibly entangled and connected. And all of that is also necessary so we can take that next leap in consciousness. And that is incredibly exciting. And I'm incredibly grateful that I get to play a part in that. So that is really my main message. And that if there's anyone of your viewers that has more questions or is really looking for answers or for support, I have many sessions. I facilitate many different modalities for people at any stage in their spiritual awakening. And I would be delighted to serve them. You can find most of my information on my website, which we can leave below the video. You can follow me on Instagram, where I post every day, where I also explain and talk about the work that I do. So there are many ways through the socials that you can get in touch with me. And if you are particularly if someone really wants to grow and doesn't really know what is the best way to go, what is maybe the best session or therapy to do, I also host 15-minute free Zoom calls. So then I can meet with you and I can sort of, get an idea of where they are, and we can together then see what is the best way to move forward. Yeah, so don't hesitate in contacting me. Can also be through YouTube, through my channel, Inner Quantum with Alexandra, or through the social media. It's all possible. And I'm looking forward to meeting some of you.